All right, Keri, we're in. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Ryan. Really happy to be here.
So, Keri, you wrote a story about me for Produced By, which is the magazine for the Producers Guild of America, and you're a freelance journalist and a freelance writer.
Yes.
And the idea behind today's podcast is we had such a great conversation when you interviewed me for that, but the story was so short that we thought maybe we could revisit some questions and get some longer answers and have a bit of fun with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Way too short. I mean, I got done. I'm like, I could write like 700 pages, but
But I think they only gave us like less than 1,000 words.
yeah, it was a column. Ironically, a day in the life of a producer.
Yeah.
Which, when is that a thing that there's a standard day?
Exactly.
Fun, but
Okay. Well, let's. So we'll just have like a really chill conversation. You can ask me a bunch of questions, and we'll kind of go back and forth. Is there anything you want to talk about how you got into being a freelance writer at the beginning, so people can know just a little bit about your background?
my background's in journalism, worked at newspapers, magazines, and yeah, I started freelancing a few minutes ago.
It's been a long journey.
Yeah, the story I wrote on you was the first I wrote for Produced By,
Okay.
which was really fun, and I've been doing a lot since, which is great. I mean, talking to producers
Yeah.
is such a fascinating job.
Crazy group of men and women out there trying to keep it all together when it's all falling apart.
And you would never know because it's just like smooth on the surface. Yeah, no, it's been fascinating, and interviewing you was especially fascinating. Because you had so many adventures, and then also because you write
Mm-hmm.
and produce and star and do all of the things. You wear so many hats. So that was really fun. I'm excited to talk more.
Out of necessity, because no one wants to work with us. But hey, we get there. Okay, so go for it. What do you got first?
Okay, well, I love your podcast. I love the vibe. So as you can see, I brought very few notes. I usually have 116 questions, like in nested lists, but
Right.
today I'm traveling light. But I wanted to start with the question you start with, which I think is so interesting, which is, where are you from?
Where am I from? Wow, you're turning it around on me. It's funny, actually. My first podcast, I did a podcast where I interviewed myself, and it was like 2 hours long, and it's podcast number 1. And I did that alone by myself in a hotel in Istanbul during COVID, which is kind of how this whole thing came about. But I won't dodge your question. So I was born in Oakville, Ontario, which is like a small suburb of Toronto in Canada. And I was born there. My parents lived there. And it was a really nice place to kind of grow up. But I was only there for a few years before we ended up kind of moving into the city. But it was lovely. And of course, growing up in Toronto, that's kind of where my real memories are. And Toronto's a great multicultural kind of city. And I went to the University of Toronto, which was a great multicultural campus. Students from all over the world. So it gets you thinking about different places in the world and how people live and how everyone kind of ends up at the University of Toronto, because it has like 60,000 students or 70,000 students now. So it was a big deal back in the day. But yeah, born and raised in Oakville and Toronto, and yeah, had a really nice kind of childhood.
I know from researching you before, not too hard this time, but that you were very active in sports and lived a fairly regulated life by necessity, playing high school and travel teams, club teams.
Yeah, so it's funny, like my dad was in the Olympics. He represented Canada in 1972 in water polo. So having a father that was really into sports and really into physical activity and things like that meant that my brother and I were introduced to that at a really young age. My brother's 3 years younger than I am, and he did the Tough Rides China and Tough Rides India trips with me. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like you grow up with a father who's in the Olympics, and you're swimming at 3 or 2, and you're skiing at 4, and you're, but eventually I kind of drifted into basketball, and that's kind of where my passions took me.
So was there pressure? I mean, that's a high bar.
Yeah, I think
To have an Olympian for a dad. I mean,
he was pretty cool. I mean, he didn't really put a lot of pressure on us to do one specific sport or to go down one specific avenue, but he definitely kind of demanded to be active, to live an active life. And not sitting on the couch, not playing video games, that kind of thing. And it was great. So yeah, so the first kind of things my dad got me into was swimming, because he was an excellent swimmer, because water polo, you're always in the pool. So I got into swimming at a very young age, and was quite good at it. And then I also played water polo for a time. And didn't enjoy that as much, because for those of you who don't know, water polo is probably one of the most violent sports on the planet.
And demanding.
And very demanding. So, people are pushing you under the water. People are kicking you all the time under the water. And I just got tired of being beat up. He loved it. Like, he thrived on that frustration and anger. And he was quite, I think he was quite nasty in his day. But for me, I was a little bit more mild tempered. And eventually, I think when I was 8, I played on my first basketball team. And then I think from there on, it was pretty much basketball. I played rugby for a time as well in high school. But it was pretty much basketball from there on.
What was it about basketball?
I don't know. It was just, it just felt like natural, like bouncing the ball, shooting the ball, passing the ball, playing team sports. I think you have to have like a real mentality to play team sports versus, solo sports like tennis or golf. I really liked being part of a team. I really liked practicing as a team, and then working towards the goal of playing games and winning games, and being actively coached. I think that's part of it that I really liked. Like, I think when you're golfing, you go out to play 18 holes, and you can't really change much over those 18 holes. Or if you're playing tennis, your coach is in the stands, but they're not actively coaching you. But in basketball, you make changes as the game goes on all the time. And I really enjoyed that. It was a lot like chess. Like, it was a lot of mentally engineering the pieces on the court, and I really love that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Be nice to have a coach in life. It's kind of like calling audibles.
Yeah. Hey, don't do that. It's not going to work out. It's like, yeah, you'll be fine. No. Yeah, having a life coach would always be helpful. But it's funny, now there's so many life coaches out there, and I've done podcasts with a few of them because I think during COVID, this whole like genre of being a life coach popped out of nowhere, because people could do it remotely, and people could, keep people on task. And I think COVID birthed the life coach.
Yeah, totally. People could see like, okay, there's money in this because everyone's going crazy right now.
Exactly.
Everyone's losing it. Like, reality severed.
We're all stuck at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting. So I'm curious about, because I have a pretty good picture of your childhood, and I'm wondering where the adventurer came from. Coming back to the where's it from question. Were there events in your childhood that kind of seeded where you ended up?
Well, we spent a lot of time outdoors as a family, and I think that was something that always stuck with me. Like, there's actually photos of my dad hiking in Banff National Park with me on his back in one of those kid backpacks. And he did that quite often, because we lived out west in Alberta, Western Canada, for a few years there, where my brother was born. So like, I was outdoors a lot. And then as a family, we played ice hockey, which is very popular in Canada, and then we also went skiing a lot. So we were always kind of outdoors, and often in the mountains or around the mountains, and it was something I really fell in love with. But it was funny, as I progressed in my sporting career, like, you just can't go skiing for 2 weeks in the winter, because you're playing basketball all winter, and it's also dangerous to go skiing if you're also playing on a high level team, right? So you just stop. So I really stopped playing a lot of other sports, especially during my university days. Um, and it's funny, like, I really had to suppress that part of me, or that desire to go out into the mountains and to go skiing or hiking or this kind of thing, because I just didn't have the time or the energy. But then once my basketball career was like over, and I wasn't able to play professionally anymore, that's really when I decided to um, go to China. And I can get into that story as well. That's a totally different tangent, but that's when I decided to go to China. And I really went to China to like find myself, because I knew like this version of myself that was the athlete, that was very much me, but it wasn't all of me. Like, I had a lot of other interests, but I didn't really know what they were. So here I am, like 22 years old. This thing I've been doing for 14 years, 15 years is now done. So it's like, what's your identity now? Like, how do you figure out what to do next? You know, and a lot of my friends, they went into law school or business school or teachers college and things like that. But I didn't want to kind of follow that path. I was looking for something a little bit different. And it was really that first trip to China where I started to realize, wow, I love telling stories. I love talking to people. I love trying to take pictures. I love writing about the people I meet and the places I go. So that's where the storytelling element of it came about. And then I was really lucky because I got to go to Tibet during that trip. And then I was like, oh my God, like I just want to live in these mountains and explore them and visit all these villages. And that's kind of how I think that all got started. And that first trip to China was in 2001.
Wow.
Mm.
It's so interesting to me. I mean, and I want to ask about the storytelling aspect as well, but you know, I think you had mentioned that you had to take that first class on China
Mhm.
because it fit your schedule.
Yeah.
But it's so weird to think about your fate in some way was decided by a sports scheduling issue. And I'm wondering, like, you were obviously taking classes before that.
Mhm.
So what was it about that class and what was it about China
Yeah.
that
Yeah, it's strange. So just so for everyone who's listening, the story that I told Keri back in the day was that um, because we played our games in university on Friday and Saturday, you really had to have your Fridays off. So you had to pack in all your classes Monday to Thursday, so that you wouldn't miss classes on Friday when you had to travel. So in order to do that, I had to like take all these classes, and there was like one schedule that wasn't really working out for me, and the only class I could take during that one point where I had a free period was Introduction to Modern China. And uh and that was the first class I'd kind of ever taken on China, and really just fell in love with it. Like, the book we had was Jonathan Spence's Modern China, uh, Introduction to Modern China, and then I went on and read all of Jonathan Spence's books from from the 1940s or 50s onwards, and he
which
was a.
is pretty crazy.
Yeah, it
You've already
was.
got all these books to read for your classes, and it's like, no, I'm taking this path.
Yeah, and then I took a few other classes about China after that, and it just felt so strange and so bizarre. Like I took like European history classes, like contemporary European history classes where we learned about Germany and France and Italy and mostly focusing around the world wars and stuff like that. But China just seemed totally otherworldly, and I also felt, and from an early stage, I felt like what I was getting in the news wasn't what was really going on there. And that just made me even more curious. And that's funny that like I was feeling that back in 2000, 2001, where you would watch a documentary on TV about China, or you would see something in the news and you just start thinking like, there's got to be more going on than just that. Like, what are they trying to get at with this agenda? And it's funny because now we live completely in that world. But this was, 20, 25, 26 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how little my son is really interested in China as well, and he's opened my eyes a lot. And I thought I was pretty literate in the ways of the general world system. So it's like, oh, you get a pretty homogenized, intentionally directed story about certain places on Earth, and China's definitely one of them.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's funny, like, as much as I had read about China, as many classes I had taken about China, as many of the professors I spent time with who were teaching about China, going there was, life-changing, so.
Okay, so let's go back one step.
Yep.
You decide after this fairly outdoorsy but contained life in China. I mean, did your family travel a lot when you were growing up? Did you leave?
No, I think the first trip I did internationally was maybe, well, to the US. So all Canadians, the first trip we ever do is like Disney World. We go to Florida, right? That's like a standard if you kind of grow up in a nice middle class life in Toronto. So I did that when I was a kid. Maybe went to New Hampshire a few times to see one of my father's close friends who had a nice little cabin by the lake and learned how to water ski. And so we were going back and forth to the US a lot. Never went to Asia as a family, and the first trip in to Europe I was like 17 or 18 when we had the wonderful opportunity to go to Italy and Switzerland for the first time, and that was quite a special journey. But that also got me super interested in traveling more and seeing more of the world. And actually, that trip got my brother interested in Europe, and then a few years later, he moved to London. So Yeah, so that trip really got him excited about Europe, and he moved to London, and then a few years later, I moved to China. So
So he had paved a little path for you.
I think so. Yeah, the world is big and beautiful, right? And I use this a lot too. Like I think we're different versions of ourselves in different environments. So, like here on the podcast, I'm one version with you, but when I was in China traveling around and meeting people, I was a different version of myself, and I really liked that version of myself. Like you don't always like yourself when you look in the mirror, or you don't like yourself, or you don't like your situation sometimes. But that version of myself traveling in China and being kind of humble and struggling with the language and trying to learn and understand a whole different culture and way of life. That to me was like that was the person that I saw when I looked in the mirror. But it took me 22 plus years to find it.
It's so interesting because I remember you just describing when you got to China and how uncomfortable you were and how you loved that. And I mean, that's a pretty tricky emotion for most people to handle, but you thrived on it. I'm wondering if you know if you've thought about why that feeling of strangeness all around you
Yeah.
was something you pursued.
I think that's the growth opportunity, right? Like I don't think any of us grow unless we're thrust into situations where we're forced to figure out puzzles on a daily basis. Like, if we just sit in our comfort zone for the rest of our lives, nothing's really going to happen because we're not pushing out against the world and seeing what comes back. And I think, the more uncomfortable situations you can put yourself in, like, maybe you're new parents and you're struggling with being a new parent, and then it takes you a little while to be uncomfortable with it. And then you find out you're a great parent, or, you're the CEO of a startup and all of a sudden you've got 2,000 employees and you don't know what to do with all your 2,000 employees and how to keep them motivated. And like, these are great problems to have if these are paths that you want to build your career on or figure out. And when I went to China, I mean, everything was uncomfortable, like the food, the language, the culture, the smoking. Oh my God, people were smoking on the trains, in the cabins, and on the buses, and that took a while to get used to. But everything was just a shock and a slap in the face. But it was really the slap I needed, and it was a wonderful way to kind of like figure out how to live there.
Were you prepared for that? Did you expect you were just like, okay, I'm going to China. We'll see what happens.
I knew it was going to be different, but I knew I wasn't going to not come home. So the first trip to China was pretty epic, actually. I worked all summer. I worked all summer at a finance job, and and then in September 2001, literally like a week after 9/11, I got on a plane to go to China. So that was fun. And then, but my parents, I believe it, like they were absolutely taking bets. So I had a 3-month trip planned, 90 days, and I was going to totally circumnavigate China by public transportation. So I was going to take buses and trains, and travel the entire way around China, even go to Tibet, Mount Everest Base Camp, the whole thing. So it was actually very similar to the Tough Rides motorcycle show I did with my brother like 10 years after that. Very similar journey, but I went and I did it, and it was life changing. I mean, it just taught you how to deal with all kinds of discomfort and challenging situations.
Yeah, I mean, why that trip? Why not go to Beijing and stay at a hostel and go to the I mean, that's insane.
Well, I wanted it to be epic. I mean, I wanted it to be like, I wanted it to be like a real journey, and I wanted it, and I was looking for something life changing. Like I was hunting for meaning and purpose, because I think it's funny. Like, you really end up. I think you really end up uh, gathering the persona or personality of the people around you. And if you work in a certain environment, even if you don't like all the people around you, I feel like you start to develop habits that are similar to a lot of the people around you and stuff like that. And and I was in Toronto and I wasn't really motivated or inspired by the people around me. Like I was working in a few different jobs and people were going off in different directions and they were doing, different things, and no one I didn't see anyone who's like, "Oh my God, I want your life," or "That's what I want to do when I, grow up," or whatever. There was no one like that anywhere in my ecosystem. So I just felt like, well, maybe I have to go somewhere else to like find it.
So interesting.
Yeah. It was a wild ride. But that first trip in China was yeah, it was all kinds of hard and difficult, and like it was before the internet really took off in China too. So you have to go and buy train tickets and bus tickets, and you have to communicate with people in Chinese and figure out like how to do that when there's 100 angry Chinese people behind you, like pushing you up to the front of the door, or window to buy the train ticket or something like that. And and you get up there and you can't speak Chinese, and what do you do? And all the people behind you are getting angry. So there was all this anxiety just around like communicating and trying to move and travel and eat. Um, but it was wonderful. Like you had to figure out fixes for it. You had to figure out how to get food and how to get on the trains and and how to navigate. And I don't know, every day I just felt myself like getting stronger as like a human being.
Yeah, that's amazing. Did
Yeah.
you learn to manage anxiety
Yeah,
better or
yeah, I stopped taking things so seriously, like like missing a train or missing a bus, in the Western world maybe that's like a big problem. But yeah, I just learned to kind of let go and be like, okay, I can't really control everything that's happening in China all the time. So, we can let things go or relax a little bit. And it definitely helped, being surrounded by a completely foreign culture, definitely made me go a little bit easier on myself.
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like good training for everyone. I mean, honestly, like,
I think it would be great. I think it should be mandatory to take a gap year. And obviously maybe athletes can't do it, but because they can't miss a year of training. But I just feel like with all the billions and billions of dollars that some people in this country have, like I think it'd be really great to like put together a gap year fund, and those who are inclined or don't necessarily have the financial resources to do it, taking like a gap year in between high school and university and going to a country where they do not speak your language. So if you're a Spanish speaking American, go to a non-Spanish speaking country. And if you're an English speaking American, go to some place that's hard to do things. And I think that that's maybe one of the best educations you can have.
so would any of them come back, do you think?
I mean, I think everyone comes back eventually. I'm never going back to Canada, so that's fine. But I think everyone comes back eventually. And if they do come back, they'll come back better and more well-rounded person because they've gone out and seen the world. There's nothing worse than listening to a commentator who pontificates about what the rest of the world is doing and what's going on in various countries, and they don't even have a U.S. passport and they can't even travel abroad, or they haven't even traveled abroad, right? So I was always big on boots on the ground, not in a military sense, but just in a storytelling sense. If you're going to tell the story about a place, or you're going to talk with any sophistication or intelligence about a place, then you have to have been there.
So what have you learned about the world in the past, how many years? It's been 20.
20 something years. Yeah, I think it was like 3 years ago I crossed the barrier between. I've lived outside of Canada longer than I've lived in Canada, so I crossed that threshold. Like I left when I was 22, and then I passed my 44th year a few years ago, and yeah, it's been longer that I've been abroad than I've been quote unquote at home. So that's been wild, and it's been a nonstop adventure. Like I spent 18 years in China, but while I was in China, I was also filming all around the world with BBC Earth, doing the Extreme Trek show, and I got to learn a lot about China, India, and Brazil through the Tough Ride shows. And then when COVID hit, I ended up in Switzerland and Dubai for a few years. Now here in LA. So I don't know. You just you get to figure out how things get done. How residency works, how legal immigration works, how taxes work. How business works on different continents. The way different cultures and religions kind of integrate or fail to integrate in various parts of the world. And you just kind of learn, where the sensitivities are, and how to approach people to kind of get what you want. If you're looking for business, or you want to make a TV show, or, you want to relocate to write or whatever, you kind of get the vibe of how all these different countries work. And I only think that makes you a better global citizen. Even if you don't use that for any specific purpose or business purpose, I still just feel like it makes you kind of like a more tolerant person.
Do you think I know you were an international politics major. Do you think that had an impact, or in terms of how you looked at the systems, or was that like book learning versus boots on the ground? Like what was different between what you'd studied about and what you have experienced?
Yeah, I think, well, book learning is a great way to start, and it can definitely support you when you're on the ground and actually doing things. But what I started figuring out is, and it's interesting because when I got to China, I started doing journalism work and I started traveling around and writing and doing photography and meeting people. And one of the things, and then I started coming back to the University of Toronto and I started connecting with all my old China professors saying, hey, like I live in China now and I work for the New York Times covering China, or I work for Time Magazine, and I was doing all that work as a freelancer. And and I said I'd love to come back and share with the class what I've learned since I've been there. And they were always so excited because most professors and stuff like that, like maybe they go to China once every 2 or 3 years, and they end up doing some kind of they end up doing some kind of collaboration with another university. So they go from one university campus in North America to another university campus in China, and their kind of real time knowledge about what's happening and what's going on is a little bit of a lagged. And one of the great things about working as a journalist in China was you were on the cutting edge of the news all the time. Like if there was a problem in one town in southern China, I went down there and I was doing the photography and sometimes the writing, depending on the magazine or the newspaper, but mostly just photography. And then, but I was right in it. I was talking to people. I was understanding the situation. And that was incredibly empowering because it was like you were sharing with people what was actually going on in China. And it's empowering for me, but it's also a huge responsibility to make sure you get it right. Make sure you try to understand both sides of the argument. Make sure you try to, really figure out what's going on so that you can represent it in the most kind of truthful possible way. And but I always kind of thrived on that. Like I was always hunting around for different points of view. Okay, we got the one angry person over here. Like let's talk to someone who's a little bit more benevolent or a little bit more open and understanding. Let's see what they have to say. I was always just trying to find to find the balance in it. And it was such a wonderful experience.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And just trying to get that balance that helps you approach objectivity, even though that's kind of an ideal. But I mean, that's what I was trained in as a journalist. Like that's the soul and the heart and the mind of journalism. And
Yeah.
to see it kind of
Be twisted.
at best, that's a very kind way to put it. But
Well, thank God for like independent journalism, because like we got these guys like Nick Shirley out there running around in Minnesota with his camera knocking on doors, and it's amazing that with all the money that the big news agencies have, that they can't even go out there and start knocking on doors too. It's just unbelievable that some 22-year-old kid from Utah is the only one doing real journalism in the United States when it comes to government fraud. We're probably going to get demonetized because of that. Yay, YouTube.
Go Utah.
Good old-fashioned Mormons.
I grew up there, so I'm very familiar with the.
Brilliant.
So what did you learn about people from all of this? Like,
Well, I think the education about people really started at university. So, like, I grew up in kind of Oakville, which is a very Caucasian suburb of Toronto. And then I went to a high school where it was a mostly Caucasian high school. We're talking about the 90s in Toronto. It was starting to become very multicultural, but it hadn't really yet. But then I got onto the University of Toronto campus, and it was like a little United Nations. I mean, there's people from all over the world there. And that was really inspiring, and that really kind of taught me, what was going on. Like taking an introduction to modern China class and sitting next to, a kid that grew up and went to school in Beijing and had now just traveled to Toronto to sit in this class and sit next to me and have a chance to chat with him and be like, is that what it's really like? Like, and he'd be like, yeah, a little bit yes, a little bit no, or whatever. So it was nice to kind of have those different perspectives and realize that that people from all over the world are just trying to get by and just trying to get a university degree or feed their families or get a job and things like that. So it really, that's kind of what really started to spark this idea of like what else is out there. So this idea of taking international politics at the university, I just loved history and I loved geography and I loved the social studies and I loved writing and I loved reading. So to me, that seemed like a bit of a natural path forward. And I also think too that the time that I had spent in Europe, luckily, on a family holiday kind of got me very interested in what the rest of the world might look like. And that kind of kept me chasing this idea of like wanting to hear people's stories and understand about what makes all these people unique and interesting and different. And that's kind of how I followed. And then of course you get to China and you think, oh, all Chinese people are the same. Well, no, they're not. You know, like officially in China, there's 55 different minorities, but actually there's more like 1,000. There's a lot of people who don't speak Mandarin or Putonghua, the official language. They have their own writing. There's a lot of different religions in China. So, you know, as I started traveling around China, I was realizing, wow, China is a huge mix of people and cultures and religions and languages, and that's even more interesting than the difference between like there's parts of China you can find people that are so different within China that it almost makes like a normal middle class Canadian white kid versus a middle class Beijing Chinese kid more similar. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, you start to kind of really understand all these nuances of how like these ethnicities and how they interact and you know where the animosity is, where the cooperation is, why things happen, you know, among tribal lines sometimes. So it was a great education in just like how the world works.
Were there any particular stories you covered, whether as a photographer or a writer, that really impacted you?
All of them. Like it was everything was so intense. I think that's the best way to describe it. Like and why was it intense? So the Chinese government does not really appreciate foreign journalists inside their country. They do issue journalist visas, and they do have bureaus of major Western newspapers and magazines and television broadcasts. They do have them in their country, but it's not free and fair. And there's a real cat and mouse game between the journalists and the government authorities that are there to try to make sure that you can't tell every story that you want. And that sounds crazy. Maybe not today, actually. There's plenty of people interfering in California and Minnesota and wherever else. But this is very much, you know, the Chinese government's playbook. Like, you know, you get on a plane to fly from Shanghai, which is where I live, to, you know, you fly 2.5 hours to Chengdu, you land in Chengdu, and there's people there waiting to meet you. You didn't tell anyone you were going to Chengdu, you didn't tell the government you were going to Chengdu, but they're there to meet you, and they'll be like, why are you here? What are you doing? Who do you want to talk to? And you can either kind of tell them the truth, in which case they might turn you around and send you back, or they might detain you for a little while until they get you to tell you the truth. So that would happen a lot. And I've been detained in probably every province in China for one reason or another as in my journalism career covering China.
And did that just become something you were used to, or was it intimidating, or?
The first time was super intimidating, and then after that, I didn't really care because it's funny. Like the Chinese will kind of detain you or try to intimidate you, but it almost never ends up in physical violence, which is great. So these kind of cat and mouse games, or this, you know, this kind of intimidation or control or detention, it was more just an annoyance instead of some kind of actual physical danger. Still exhausting though. It was just exhausting. Like it's just, but it's funny. Like every story was just so intense. Like I remember, what was a good story? Like, well, okay, like in 2008, before the Beijing Olympics, in May, there was a huge earthquake in Sichuan province in central China, and officially it killed 88,000 people, but there were hundreds of thousands of people dead. Like they really adjusted the news media. So this is a really good example of what happens in China. So you have this natural disaster, a big natural disaster, and there's all kinds of grief and support and outpouring from the global community for China, right? So the Chinese love that. So we've had a tragedy, we want help, right? That's you know, that's how any country would act. And then the first few days we were down there, and I was there for almost 2 weeks covering this story. And it was the first time I'd really been consumed by that much like human death. Like it was everywhere. And so the first few days, because the news stories were so positive and everyone was like, we need to help China and we need to send them, you know, cement, and we need to send them steels to rebuild, and we need to get experts there to help them rebuild bridges and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, it was the most wonderful, terrible journalism experience I'd had for that first few days, because they let us go anywhere. They let us talk to anyone. We were surrounded by tragedy and death, but at the same time, we were able to freely move and really kind of understand what was going on. And then about 4 or 5 days into the story, this ongoing story that was happening, we started to realize that a disproportionate number of children's schools collapsed versus the apartment buildings around them. And then we started to realize that the schools weren't built to code, and they had charged a certain amount of money, and then they had skimmed and built the schools and they weren't earthquake proof. But the flats, the apartment buildings all around the schools, they stayed up. But a disproportionate number of schools collapsed, and a massively disproportionate number of school children died during the earthquake. So it took us about 4 days to figure that out, of traveling around the whole area. And once that story came out, we got shut down. Like, we couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't talk to anyone. The government officials were detaining foreign journalists. You couldn't photograph anyone. No one wanted to talk to you. The government was intimidating their local people not to speak out. And then the government was just grabbing people and driving them to other cities and dropping them off, like journalists. Like,
Wow.
it was crazy. So that's one example of how the tone could switch that
Did you
quickly.
expect that? I mean, did you know this is a story that they're not going to want out? And so were you looking over your shoulder or?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. You're always looking over your shoulder if you're a journalist in China. It's funny, like, my career was very different. Like, I started off covering China doing travel stuff. So I had this deal. So the way it works is, or the way it worked for me was, I moved to China, and, for the first 6 months, I was teaching English part-time and trying to get my journalism career going. And then after about 6 months, I could sustain myself on writing and photography. But my living expenses were incredibly low. So it was great. I didn't have financial stress, and I could just kind of focus on trying to hone my craft. So the way I started is, I would go out to these like remote places in Tibet, or these other provinces, and I would, do these wonderful travel stories, and I would write them and do the photography as well. And then the newspapers or magazines would give me like a fixed amount, and it was great. So the way I started working for like English language expat magazines, or in China. So there was That's Shanghai, That's Beijing. Those were like the two big ones. So I worked for them for a while, and then you kind of graduate from that once you've got enough exposure, and then you go to like the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong, which is their big newspaper. Or you start, and then also too, you can start working for airline magazines, which used to pay really well back in the day. And then I was working for like Cathay Pacific, which is out of Hong Kong, and Singapore Airlines, and I was doing all their China stuff. So I really came at this from like a travel and adventure space. And then I kind of got sucked into harder journalism. And I really enjoyed the harder journalism stuff, as long as I could keep going back to the travel stuff. So I would have like 5 or 6 weeks of working nonstop with people like at the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Time, Newsweek, Forbes, Fortune. And then I would disappear for 2 weeks and do, 2 or 3 travel stories by myself, hiking around in Tibet or something like that, as a way to like balance it out. Cause it was just too much. Like, it was too much chaos.
Yeah. And were you given more leeway and freedom as a travel writer versus, or did they not distinguish once you started writing hard news?
So the great thing about the hard news stuff is, it was always the writers that were getting in trouble, not the photographers, for the most part. So like, I worked with two amazing New York Times writers, Howard French and David Barbosa, and I was amazing that we had the chance to overlap. And I worked with them both a bunch, more Howard than David, but um, and we they would get in trouble everywhere they went, and I was able to just kind of stand off to the side, because they had like the proper journalist visas, and they were, part of the bureau and blah blah blah, and they were being watched all the time, whereas I was more of like the freelancer, and they didn't really care too much about trying to put pressure on me. But if we got detained, we would all get detained. But no one was kind of like opening up my camera or trying to see what photos were on it or anything like that. But they would just be, asking why you're here, what story you're doing, blah blah blah, as a way of trying to get some kind of like pre-approval. But of course, we didn't really need pre-approval, but they would always try to intimidate us in some way or shape or form.
Interesting. I know in '08 with the financial crash and print journalism tanking, a lot of forces kind of came into play. I'm wondering, before that point, had you thought about going in a different direction, or was journalism your career at that point? And
Yeah, I think journalism was my career at that point, and I think it was going so well that I didn't have to look anywhere else. Like, I was busy. I had established myself as kind of the Western Caucasian photographer in China who could do all the assignments. Um, there were two wonderful photographers who were a little bit older than me. One's name was Fritz Hoffman, he's an American, and another one was Greg Gerard, and he was a Canadian, both living in Shanghai. And they were there before me, and they had built wonderful portfolios, and they'd published books about China. And they were really the guys that I wanted to emulate when it comes to quality of storytelling. And, and Greg and Fritz both ended up working for National Geographic and publishing these beautiful books. And Greg went a little bit more of an art route and had an incredible art career as well. So I was kind of like nipping at the heels of Greg and Fritz. In some ways of trying to get their assignments. So they would get all like the really amazing assignments like National Geographic and some of the bigger magazines that could offer like really long assignments. And I was kind of doing everything that they didn't want to do, which was still more than enough to keep me busy. Yeah. But it was really wonderful. And going into '08, I mean, I didn't have any interest in changing my career or doing anything else, but it was funny because in like in 2007, I think I can't remember what the number was, but I did like 90 something assignments for various magazines and newspapers around the world, right? And if you take 52 weeks a year, that's more than one big assignment a week. So I was cooking, and I had corporate jobs as well. Like once you're in the New York Times, and that newspaper's read all around China and Southeast Asia, there's people out there that will look at the bylines of who the photographer is and be like, oh, it's a beautiful picture. That guy's in Shanghai. And then you'll get a call being like, hey, I have a factory in Shanghai and there's some new director of the factory and I need a corporate portrait for him for our annual report or something like that. So because I was so exposed in the Western media as a photographer based in China, I ended up getting all these corporate jobs, and they pay much better than the regular journalism jobs. Yeah. So just for people out there, all these like massive multinational companies in the United States, like Fortune 500 companies in the United States, were having me photograph their projects and things like that. In China, like I think my claim to fame was I got to photograph inside the Three Gorges Dam, which is probably one of the most highly restricted places to ever visit in the world. So it's like the largest dam in the world. It kind of sits right in central China. And it was very controversial when it was built because it flooded. The reservoir flooded a massive amount of land, and something like a few million people had to relocate. So it was very controversial at the time. But I got to go in there because Alstom, the French conglomerate, had turbines in the mine, and they hired me to go into the mine. It's not into the mine. Sorry, into the dam, and I got to shoot inside the dam for 2 full days for Alstom's annual report, because they had turbines in the Three Gorges Dam in China. And then the other one I got to do was the Mori building, the Shanghai World Financial Center, which at the time was the highest building in Shanghai. It was 101 floors, but it was owned by a Japanese company, and the Japanese company hired a PR agency, and the PR agency found me because I was in the New York Times, and they hired me to photograph the entire construction of the building. This was the best job I ever had. So like once a month I would go and put on a harness and go up with the scaffolders and the guys working up in the building, and I would get to spend a day a month for like years photographing the construction and the life of this construction of the building. And that was an absolute highlight, as good as any journalism story I'd ever done. So it was great to have the chance to like show the world what the rapid development of China was looking like. And that's exactly what I had the chance to do from like 2002 to about 2019.
So what kind of background did you have in photography? Is that something you learned? Like,
None.
so did you have a natural talent, or were you like, okay, how does this work? And who's going to help me figure it out?
It was very much, so I didn't have any art background at all. I didn't have any real writing background at all, apart from the international politics and stuff like that, and writing for those kinds of assignments or tests or essays. And I didn't have any idea of how to take pictures. But what I did was I figured out what style of photography I really liked, and it was very much more of a documentary style photography, where the subject isn't looking at you and you somehow embed yourself with people around you, and you can kind of eventually stay there and make everyone comfortable long enough that you can start kind of documenting their lives and taking pictures without them noticing you or focusing on you. And that's where you kind of build trust with your subjects. And And that's kind of in my mind where always the best kind of photography came from. And I'd listened to a lot of photographers speak at that stage, and I had the chance to also ask people like Fritz Hoffman and Greg Girard, who were the two elders in Shanghai that I had the chance to kind of follow up on, and I would listen to them speak all the time, and I really tried to follow in those footsteps, and it was wonderful. But yeah, but I had no formal training at all, and it took a while to get there. It took a while to like look through the camera and feel comfortable because you're looking through the camera and you can only see kind of this, but you have to be also comfortable with everything around you. And sometimes that can be a little disorienting. So, because you don't want to be kind of moving your eyes off the camera and looking too much around you because then you might miss something that's kind of happening right in front of you. So it took a while to get used to, but like I said, I was blessed because I c- once I started working for the New York Times, that opened me up to just all the global publications, and then I was working so much that even though I wasn't really like a top flight photographer in my early days, I had so much work, luckily, that I was able to really hone my skills and really figure out what I was doing. And
Getting paid to learn.
yeah, learning on the job basically, and that was a dream come true.
Huh.
Yeah,
Interesting. I'm just curious how you met Howard French. Was that at a coffee house or like
yeah, like
how did that happen?
so my story with Howard was really funny. There was this there was this magazine in Shanghai, and it had a classified section, and I would always look for it because it would have like, oh, we have like rugby tryouts if you want to play rugby, or a group of Americans are playing basketball at this high school gym every Wednesday night. Come join. $10 to cover the court fees or something like that. So I was always looking in these classified ads that were online, and then I saw someone like looking for a tennis partner, and it was Howard W. French of the New York Times, and I had wanted to work for the New York Times, and I thought, well, I should fucking play tennis with Howard, and we can have a laugh and see if we get along. And I wasn't a great tennis player; he was pretty good, so he absolutely wiped the floor with me. But we got chatting afterwards, and I knew who he was obviously because I was a journalism bug at that stage, and we really got along really well. And he goes, "Look, show me some of your photos, and if I like them, you got to go to New York to get like passed, and you have to show your work to the. This is back when we had like physical books, with pictures in them. So then you have to get passed in New York, and then I could come back to China and work with him. So he set that whole thing up for me, and then I all of a
That's
sudden I had
a
a career.
life-changing moment.
It was, yeah.
Tennis game.
Yeah, that tennis game was great, and I thank him to this day, and we're still good friends, and we still talk quite a bit. He's in New York. Um, he's a professor of journalism at Columbia, but he still writes a book a year on all these topics, and he's just he's one of these guys. He was in Africa for 20 years working for the New York Times. He was in Japan, covering Japan and South Korea. Then he was in China, and then he officially retired from the newspaper around 2008, just before the collapse of the print publishing industry. So his timing was amazing, but he was just this worldly man to learn from. And he's maybe 10 or 15 years older than me, but he had just been everywhere, seen everything. He'd been in plane crashes. He'd gotten malaria in the jungles of sub-Sahara Africa. Like he had just done it all. So spending 3 days with him, going on assignment in China for something, was like a dream come true. So
Wow.
yeah, so
So what do you think? What is something you learned from him that
yeah. I mean, I went to the school of Howard French. That was how I learned how to be a journalist. Just again, that balance was beautiful. Looking for as many sides and many perspectives around a story as possible, but just the professionalism was incredible. And then later on, as Howard started to leave the New York Times and started to plan what was kind of coming next, I started working with David Barbosa, and he won a Pulitzer for his work in China, and again, same level of professionalism, same level of like high quality storytelling.
how lucky to be, mentored by
Yeah, I mean, I was like 23 years old or something like that, and I had the chance to work with Howard French, who was I guess by then in his 40s maybe, and or late 30s, and a 25-year veteran of the New York Times, and yeah, it was just the best experience possible. Yeah. It's wild when you think about it. But without that little introduction, my career would have not started in as well as it did. But again, like that's the thing. The expat community in Shanghai was super small. Everyone kind of knew each other. This was before China's huge economic rise. There weren't a lot of people around. So when there were expats when there were events for foreigners in Shanghai, it was always kind of like the same 100 people or so. There were always people who had families and they lived out of the city centers and they would work at factories and stuff like that. They wouldn't come into the city, but like a lot of the journalists, or people working for Fortune 500 companies in the city center, like there were always the same groups around.
That was just a fascinating culture to be a part of within that larger culture.
It was, it really felt special. And the funny thing is that Shanghai at that time was so cheap. And people don't know that. Like Shanghai today is one of the most expensive cities in the world. But back then it was super cheap. And I remember, we were teaching English back in the day and we couldn't spend our monthly salaries. Outside of going to a 5-star hotel and going for dinner and having drinks at an overpriced bar or an overpriced restaurant, just going out to like the local bars and the restaurants that we like to go to that were around our school and stuff like, and the rent, like we just couldn't spend the money we made every month as English teachers, let alone as journalists or executives at, Fortune 500 companies. So Shanghai was like a real place where you didn't have to worry about money and you could just focus on your craft or focus on your storytelling or focus on your passion project. And without that freedom, I wouldn't, like if I tried to start my career as a photographer in New York with the financial burdens that young people have there, or the taxes, the tax system, or just the fact that there's very few people doing stories about New York. Like it was like the two things happened for me is I went to a country that was already a huge news story. And I got in with a few really amazing people that I learned from along the way who taught me how to do the job. So, but the key is like, I went to China. Like I didn't go to, I mean, I could have been equally busy in some place like Mexico or maybe in some place in South America, but China was the news story and it still is. And as it was rising and, it was growing and the GDP growth was so much and everyone was making so much money investing in China that, it was just endless work. So I really feel like I caught the time of the rise of China really well from 2002 to 2019. And then also I was surrounded by really amazing people.
So for all those young wannabe Ryan Piles out there, where's the China of today? Where would you go if you were starting out today and looking for that kind of opportunity?
Yeah, it's funny, like journalism has totally changed. And the newspapers, the mainstream media is, to be polite, co-opted in a lot of ways. I really feel like they're not offering balanced opinions anymore. And I don't know if that's the journalist's fault or if it's the editor's fault or the newspaper's bend in general. I'm not really involved in that space anymore. And I've sent podcast invitations to every print writer and television journalist in Los Angeles to come on the podcast and talk about it. And no one wants to come on and talk about it.
Might have something to do with those multinationals paying the bills.
It might.
Oh no.
It might. But I would say that probably the most interesting. So if I was 22 years old coming out of college right now in 2026, I would probably go to India. I think that China's rise has been great, but it has a bit of a demographic time bomb where there's too many old people and not enough young people to pay all the pensions because they had that one-child policy for so many decades that was devastating to their population. But I actually have a point on this too. The one-child policy was a bit horrific because in the Western world, we think like, how dare you tell someone how many kids they can have? They should be able to have as many kids as they want, right? But I lived in China for 18, 19 years. And China at the time had 1.3 billion people. And I read a study once that said if China had not implemented the one-child policy in the 1960s, I think, when they did that, or maybe the 1970s, then China, when I was there, would have had about 2.5 billion people. And I can tell you that China barely ran with 1.3 billion people, let alone 2.5 billion people. So as much as everyone wants to say, hey, you should be able to have as many kids as you want or have, make your own choices. I can say that China with 2.5 billion people and everyone engaging in their complete freedom of having children, I think would have been an absolute horror show. So was that policy, justified? Maybe not, but but it's funny, how the Western world would say something like a one-child policy is devastating to the human rights of people in China. But I also think too, like they're making that argument because they know if China has too many kids, they'll just bankrupt themselves. Like it's a country they wouldn't be able to run. They just wouldn't have any way to do that. So that's kind of my little aside on the one-child policy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
What was the original question?
India. India's the opportunity. India is the new China,
I think India
possibly.
I think India is the new China. Like, so as China goes through this demographic time bomb right now we're back on track. It's going to have a real slowdown in the next, decade or so. And of course, India's taken over as the number one populous country in the world. And India is so interesting when it comes into, when you get into this hierarchy of business and politics and the caste system and all this kind of stuff, and the way different religions all kind of live and operate with relative ease and peace in one country. I just feel like India is an endless visual story that has been told really well over the ages. But I just think it's going to be the biggest probably story over the next 20 years, what happens in India and how India grows, whether it decides to maintain its kind of peaceful democratic values, or maybe it goes in a different direction. That's always possible. You never know who the next leader is going to be, or whether that leader is going to give up power and transfer power peacefully, as most democracies. Like Xi Jinping took over China in 2015-16, and he was only supposed to stay for 8 years. But now he's into his third term, which is unprecedented. It hasn't happened since Mao Zedong. So you never know when someone's going to come in and start changing the rules. But if India continues on its kind of peaceful democratic rise, and more countries start moving production and things like that from China to India, I think India is a great place to live. You can find cheap accommodation. You can travel around pretty cheaply. The internal flights are cheap. You can travel by train. I did a motorcycle trip around India. I don't recommend that. That was terrifying.
I remember you saying it's not the brightest move.
Not the easiest, but I think it's an endless story. And if I could spend 20 years in one country documenting it, I think India would be the place.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So shifting gears now to 08, when we kind of I formulated the article around you that I did do around your pivots. And that was a big pivot for you. When you and your brother ate in Central Park and decided to ride motorcycles around. Now, was that the original route that you went?
It was almost the exact original route that I did in 2001.
On motorcycles.
On motorcycles, yeah.
All right.
So this is the thing. So in 2008, I am flying as high as I've ever been. Like I am in my 20s. I am making a ton of money as a freelance journalist back when freelance journalist payment was proper. Like I said, I was doing like 90 something stories a year in 2007. And I was traveling all the time, and I was working with all these newspapers, and I loved it. Like I would still be doing that today if the work was there. Like it was really happy. I loved working with all the different editors and photo editors and all the different jurisdictions all around the world. And I loved being the guy that they could trust to go out and get the story and come back and deliver it and have this, and just, I loved having that responsibility, and I loved being that reliable for all these partners. So that was a dream. But then, of course, in September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed, Bear Stearns collapsed. So we had a financial crisis, and of course, people lost their homes. The stock market collapsed. Several banks blew up and had to be ingested into other banks. So it was complete chaos. And one of the small side effects of the financial crisis was that print publishing died. And how did it die? Well, it had been coming, and we were all just waiting for the black swan event to finally kind of kick it over into the grave and bury it. And the financial crisis was it. And so what had happened is, over the last like 4 or 5 years, all the classified ads had disappeared from the New York Times newspaper. And I'm going to specifically talk about the New York Times, because that is that story kind of emanates across the entire landscape. So, back in 2002 or 2003, if you wanted to sell a car in New York City, you had to pay the New York Times $200 to put an ad in the New York Times with your phone number, so that on Sunday, when people looked in the classified ads, someone would call you and want to buy your car. And that was it. Like the online world didn't exist at that stage. And then over the next few years, like Craigslist and other online forums started to pop up. And what wasn't really understood was those classified ads were like the number one revenue generator for the newspapers. So all this revenue was starting to go from the New York Times and other newspapers and stuff like that and magazines. So it was all just seeping out. And then people started online advertising, and that was a whole new thing. Banner ads on websites and stuff like this, and it was, anyways, it was all changing. And then in 2008, it seemed like the print publishing world just completely collapsed.
It's kind of amazing to think that the fourth estate was resting on Joe selling his truck on Sunday.
That's really true.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
considering the responsibility and the role of print journalism,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
And I think that was kind of the beginning of the end of print journalism too, because I think that after that they became desperate and they tried to build these online models, which are to a degree successful. But I also think they were desperate. And in their desperation, I think they reached out to a lot of Fortune 500 companies and maybe sold their souls a little bit for ad revenue in exchange for influence. That's a hypothesis that I have. No proof, but I feel like the downfall of Western journalism is really kind of came about eyeballs moving and these legacy institutions becoming desperate and having to make compromises that they wouldn't have made a decade earlier. And that obviously happened to CNN, and a lot of other channels that are now just running like 95% pharmaceutical ads, and they're completely kind of co-opted by big pharma. So, I think the financial crisis in 2008 was kind of the beginning of this demise. But what it meant that I would go a month without getting any work after doing 90 something stories, in 2007 before the financial crisis. By 2009, the writing was on the wall. Like there's no work. Like these people have been paying my salary, for a decade, and it's over. Like,
So did you ever think of going back to Canada at that point?
no, there was nothing in Canada that interested
Okay.
me. Yeah. So it was more like, okay, well, how do I transition this into something? And I was like, and it's funny because I thought to myself, like, I could make TV. Like I watch people make TV about China, and it's okay. It's not great. It's not bad. The hosts are okay. The hosts are hit and miss. The production companies that do the work, I think I can do better than them. I think I can get into better locations. I think I can tell more interesting stories. There's places I've been that they haven't been. These big production companies that do all this National Geographic and Discovery Channel stuff, like they sit in Singapore, they sit in Hong Kong, and they sit in Shanghai and Beijing, and they don't really understand what's going on in the whole country. So when they get an assignment or whatever like that, they're just bean counters. They're trying to take in X, film it for Y, and get it out into the world. And there's not like a lot of heart and soul behind it. And I always felt like that was a huge gap in the storytelling that I was seeing in China. There was too much production. Things were overproduced. And then I think it was also being done by people that were just less interested in what was actually going on. And China was everything to me. And it was so interesting. And I was so passionate about storytelling that I was like, okay, well, if the TV world is done, or sorry, if the print publishing world is done and I can't do all these magazines and newspapers anymore, maybe I can try to make television. So I spent all of 2009 trying to figure out what my next move was going to be. And and at some stage in 2009, I watched The Long Way Round and Long Way Down with Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman, and they rode motorcycles from London to New York, going through Russia and the Road of Bones and Alaska and all that kind of stuff. So that was a buddy trip. It was a little too Hollywood in some places, but they had the trip of a lifetime, and they went to places that most people hadn't filmed before. And they really, for all their intents and purposes, and without judging them on their physical toughness or their ability to deal with problems under pressure, I thought it was a great journey, and it was a great TV show. And I was like, someone should make a show like this just about China. And then I was like, well, I should do it then. Like I can take this premise, which was beautiful, and they did it so well. And I think the original show they did was on National Geographic, I think, and it was like 10 episodes or something like that. And I just loved what they had done, and I loved the spirit of it. They just kind of went out with a small camera and made it happen. And I thought, wow, like maybe I can show off China in a way that looks like that. And then literally like 2 or 3 months later, I met my brother and I was talking about all these feelings and ideas that I was having. And then we were just like, maybe we should just try to ride motorcycles around China together. And he was just exiting one of his companies that he had worked at and was going to have a few months off. And so the timing kind of worked out perfectly where it was like, okay, in August of 2010, we're going to spend about 60 days. It ended up being 65, but riding motorcycles all the way around China and trying to figure out how to tell that story in a way that's compelling and interesting. And that's the most kind of gonzo out there, one camera guy, no permits, just, trying to make it happen.
Did you have a schedule? Were you
We had a schedule. Yeah, we had a schedule.
so you did like a formal production?
Well, it was funny because like what I did was my brother was like, oh yeah, like my brother's very optimistic. So he was like, yeah, we can get a motorcycle company to sponsor us. And I'm like, well, maybe, I don't know. Like we're not celebrities or anything. And we don't know, no one really knows us as television hosts or even motorcyclists. Like I think at this stage, the longest motorcycle trip I'd ever done was like 2 days, like an overnighter, one night out, one day out, one night back. And my brother, I think, had been on like a 3-day motorcycle trip.
You guys are ready.
We're ready. Yeah, that was it. Not short on confidence, but he was like, oh, we can get sponsors here and here and here. And I was like, okay, let me try this. So we met in New York. We came up with that idea. We actually went to the Apple store on Fifth Avenue and went down into the Apple store and got on Google Maps, and we tried to like map out our exact route around China. And I remember that clear as day. And it was basically the exact route I had done on public transport in 2001. And I had been to all these provinces over the last 10 years as a photographer. So like I knew translators and guides and fixers and people who could work and help us get around the country. So that was what I was kind of bringing to the table. And so what I did was I put together a shoot schedule, and I figured like we should try to make it episodic. So I figured like, we need to have a few beats every episode that are fixed shoots. So we visited the border with China and North Korea. That's like a nice fixed bit. We went up the mountain and looked over and looked into North Korea, but we didn't see anything. It was all foggy and cloudy that day. But that was kind of like one little beat. Another beat would be, visiting the last section of the Great Wall of China in Gansu province out in the desert. So we did that. So we had all these beats and all these like little things that we wanted to do along the way. And then in between all those things would just be chaos. Like, how do you ride a motorcycle around China? The first 2 weeks it rained on us. The next 2 weeks was windstorms and sandstorms. And then after that, it was 16,000 feet, 5,000 meters above sea level riding motorcycles in Tibet,
And was there any point where you were like, this was a terrible idea?
I think we thought that on a pretty like daily basis, but we never thought about like turning around. I think we were basically like, this is insane, but this is awesome.
Okay.
And as hard as this is the most alive like we've ever felt. And that really woke me up to the possibilities of like, can I have a career telling stories where I feel this alive, or I feel this engaged, or I feel this excited to tell these stories on a daily basis. And of course, you're doing something quite romantic. You're riding a motorcycle around a country, but at the end of the day, it's not romantic. It's gritty. It's painful. It's difficult. You fall off your bike. You have to deal with border patrol, the military stopping us here and there. Like we got into all kinds of problems along the journey, but luckily nothing stopped us from finishing the journey. So we were able to finish the trip. But it was brutal from start to finish. But that was the goal, right? Because again, it was like that first day in China in 2001. Like you just have to do the hard things every day until they become easy. And then after a week or two, you're a stronger human being.
Yeah. So that pattern again of being uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think that's where the best stories are told. We'll see. I don't know.
All right. So I'm wondering, in your extreme rides and treks and tough rides, extreme treks, was there any moment where like the romantic poets have this idea of the sublime, where something is so beautiful that it's almost horrifying? I'm wondering if there was any moment anywhere you've been where you had that feeling of being almost overwhelmed by nature.
Every single trip I've done in my life where I filmed TV shows, I had a moment like that. Like Yeah, in when the motorcycle trips were a little different because sometimes you would just slog through for days through traffic and shittiness and small towns and bad road quality and crazy traffic. And but then you would but then you would come up to this high pass, or you'd come up to this river, and it was just breathtakingly beautiful, and it just washed away all the shit that you'd just been through for the last couple days. And that was really special. But the really amazing stuff was on the Extreme Trek shows that I did and the Expedition Asia shows, Extreme Treks for BBC and Expedition Asia for Discovery, because there you're climbing mountains and walking across deserts and doing all this amazing stuff. And every single trip, the rainforest of Papua New Guinea, the Wadi Rum Desert in Jordan, Glacier National Park in the wintertime in snowshoes. Aconcagua is 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet, 24,000 feet. Like all these places, the nature was overwhelmingly spectacular. And I completely got addicted to that. Like, because being out in that kind of nature and exercising every day, sleeping outside in nature, like I spent like a decade filming 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, living in a tent. You just get addicted to that lifestyle because nature feeds you in a way that living in a city can never feed you. And you just get addicted to that drug and that nutrient of being outside, exercising, eating healthy, sleeping healthy, walking 10 hours a day, climbing mountains, eating healthy, going to bed at sunset, waking up at sunrise. Like, this is the way human beings were meant to live. And when you sync up with that essence of what it is to be human, it's so powerful.
And I mean, that's kind of horrifying in itself because so few people have that opportunity. And
Yeah, but we all used to live like that. I mean, we all, like, I don't know how many thousands of years or how many versions of advanced civilization we've had on this planet, but there were always kind of hunters and gatherers. And it's very much like, I think the great way to describe it, like the adventure shows that we make, we were very much, hunter and gatherer filmmakers. Like, we would go out across a desert for 12 days, we'd do 100 plus miles. And we had no idea what we were going to come across. So we were out there hunting and gathering, like, where's the story? What can we film today? Let's get our camel driver unpacking the camels. Oh my God, the camel driver's wife, she sings every night when she cooks dinner for us. And she sings the most beautiful songs, and she has the most amazing, let's film that. Like, we were just kind of hunting and gathering all these little moments to make a show about what it means to do this amazing journey in nature. And every location was breathtaking. And I'm so thankful that I produced that show and directed it, because every single location was exactly what I wanted. And every single episode was exactly the story I wanted to tell. There were no compromises, and the buck stopped with me on everything. And I had amazing collaborators. My cinematographers were incredible. My editors were incredible. Our music composition was remarkable. Like, everything, like I put together like a really amazing team. And we were just able to go on a run there for like 7 or 8 years where we would just travel the world constantly. But it was that addiction of being in incredibly beautiful places all the time, and having your body like sync up with Mother Nature, that you're never tired. You're always running on full energy. You sleep like a baby. Like, there was no screen, there's no sitting in bed looking at your phone because you didn't have a signal. Like, there was no sitting around the television at night because you were in a tent. You didn't go to bed at 11 p.m. You went to bed at 6 when the sun went down. You didn't wake up at 9 struggling in the morning. You woke up at 5 because that's when the sun came up. You didn't have to worry about exercising every day because you have to fucking walk to the next camp. Like, everything was kind of taken care of for you, and you just had to move through these gorgeous places. And it was such a simplistic, magical way to live. And we were able to work and earn an income and tell stories and share that with the rest of the world. It was the best job I've ever had.
so how do you, well, that all sounds spectacular and crazy and rare. And I'm wondering how do you adjust to not having that regularly a part of your life?
Yeah, I think the first 3 years of COVID were really rough. So we got shut down because of COVID, essentially. Like, we were, I always tell people in 2019, that was like peak me. We did 10 expeditions, which was 10 episodes in 10 countries. And I did something like 46 speaking events that year as well. So I was on an airplane, and I had relocated to Dubai at that stage because I was traveling so much globally. by that time, almost none of my work was in China anymore. Um, and it's very interesting because when I started this journey in storytelling, all I wanted to do was tell stories about China. But it got to the point where I was making too many stories about China and no one wanted them because it was too much. So people started saying, like, hey, Ryan, like, if you're going to make 8 episodes about trekking and climbing, why don't you do them in 8 different countries on 5 different continents and really spread it out? Because if you just do 8 episodes in China, I can't buy them from you because no one wants to watch 8 episodes of China, but people want to watch Argentina and Australia and India and blah, 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 blah. So,
That brings a whole different level of producing mindset to go into a country where you don't have all the connections or don't have the guides.
but I had learned enough along the way to make it possible. And I loved it. Like producing, and that's why we ended up meeting and with the Producers Guild of America and the story, I love producing more than anything in the world and being able to like find a location and find a journey and then having the idea of like what we can kind of mine from that experience and then working on the permits, the regulations, the guides that are going to take us out there, paying all those bills, getting my team together, making sure everyone, has the time off and then keeping the edits on track and making sure we're delivering to the broadcasters. And, I would go and film in Indonesia, for 2 weeks in the middle of nowhere. And then I would come out of the jungle and my editor would be like, hey, I need you to do VO on this episode you did 2 months ago. And then I would fly to Singapore, meet Discovery Channel because we were doing the show with them, show them a few clips. And then I would go to the voiceover place in Singapore and do, 4 hours of voiceover for the last episode. And then I'd fly to Shanghai, to meet. So it was just constantly going. But we were making amazing stuff. And it was wild. So 2019 was absolutely peak me. Things were going really well. And we were lining up work for 2020. We had a lot of work lined up in 2020. Contracts were signed. Things were just going on as normal. And then COVID hit. So all my contracts got negated because like force majeure act of God, which was a thing. And then, yeah, it's funny, like the United States and places like Switzerland, for example, they opened up quite quickly. Like maybe it was a couple weeks here, a couple weeks there, whatever. But international travel did not go back to normal. Like this idea of filming in 10 countries in 10 months was not not an issue, like not even a hope. There was no way. Like the PCR tests, if someone got sick, it was a 2-week quarantine. Like, if are these PCR tests even working? Is COVID actually a thing? If we've all had COVID, you know, can we just ride out the natural immunity and just get back to fucking work? Like all these ideas were playing out and just international travel was just devastated. So it really, everything came to a grinding halt. And that was absolutely massive depression, like bar none. Like having that freedom to travel around and to do all those amazing things for all those years and to make a living from it was such a gift. And to have it all come crashing down was horrific.
So how did you manage that? Did you know, because things were unfolding week to week at that point, was it pretty clear at a certain point?
Yeah, but not right away. And this is the thing, like, I think if they had come out and said, hey, everyone's fucked for the next 3 years, then I probably would have gone into a hole and just buried my head in the ground for 3 years and been like, okay, I'll come up in 3 years and see what everything looks like. But they didn't. They said, oh, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there. And I was stuck in Istanbul for 4 months. Like I couldn't even go back to my home in Dubai at that time because Dubai closed their borders to residents, but they allowed citizens to enter. So I didn't have a UAE passport. I had a UAE residence permit. So I couldn't go back to Dubai. I ended up in Istanbul for 4 months, twiddling my thumbs. I started this really fun thing called the COVID calls on my Instagram, where I would do an Instagram live with one of my friends in a different part of the world just to keep myself busy. And I did 100 of them in 4 months. And I did one almost every day while I was in Istanbul just to like keep myself busy. I had to produce something. And then it was funny because the whole time I was in Istanbul, I was like, okay, by the summer, COVID hit. Like, okay, so I was in Ethiopia when COVID shut down the world. So this was like mid-March 2020. I was filming in Ethiopia because I thought like, if the Western world closes, Africa's not going to close. People are just going to get on with life. And I can go to Africa and I can make 3 or 4 beautiful episodes over the next few months. And then in between the episodes, we can stay in these really pretty places and keep our costs low and still get work done. But then I was in Ethiopia and then Dubai closed and then Ethiopia started closing their borders and the countries around Ethiopia started. And I was like, holy shit. So we had to cancel filming for the first time in my life and like run to the nearest road, which was like a 8 or 9 hour run. And then we took the car back to Addis Ababa. And then I only had like 2 countries I could fly to. One was Turkey because they hadn't closed their borders, and one was Canada where I'm a passport holder. But the rest of the world was off limits, and that was so bizarre. So I went to Turkey because I was still trying to set up projects in the Middle East for whenever this shit would be over. So I didn't want to be like working all night, living in my father's basement or something like that. So in Canada, so I just decided to stay in the region and see what I could come up with. So the whole time I was in Istanbul, I was planning of what we would do when we would get out. So one of my camera guys was in the US at his family's home. Another camera guy was in Canada, his family's home. My editor was in New Zealand, locked down. We were all kind of locked down and we are like, okay, guys, if we can get out, we're going to go here. We're going to go here. So I had figured that when I could get out of Turkey, and Turkey was one of the last countries to reopen because they didn't really close down. And then all the other countries penalized Turkey because they didn't really lock down. It just, nothing made sense. So getting out of Turkey was a real problem. But then I was able to get into Europe. And then as a Canadian, I'm allowed to stay 3 months in Europe. So what I did was I flew in all my guys into Europe and we filmed in Europe for the whole summer. So July, August, September, October, November. And then, we walked across Switzerland. We did the Via Alpina trek. That was like 300 miles across Switzerland. We walked over 20 days. That was incredible. We filmed in Poland. We filmed in Malta. We filmed in Croatia. That was incredible. And then in November, it all came to a head and Europe closed their borders again. And then we went back to Dubai and then it was like really over. Because I tried to like keep it going and I tried to like get back to work as normal. But while I was trying to get back to work, the rest of the world had kind of like moved on. And the fact that they reclosed all the countries again in Europe in November 2020 was a real disappointment. And then after that, I just realized like free and clear travel is dead. And it's not 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. It's 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. And it's like, how can I plan anything? So I went back to Dubai in November 2020, completely kind of dejected.
So what did you do? How did you get through that period? How did you?
Yeah, I mean, you're just bored. I mean, can you imagine, filming 250 something days all around the world, meeting all these amazing, inspiring people,
The exact opposite.
and then just nothing.
Nothing, alone.
4 walls and silence.
It's pretty intense.
It was devastating. Yeah. Like, take your pick on mental health disorders. I probably went through all of them, during that time, along with alcohol abuse. Like there was nothing happening. And, you're going through, so I was editing all the stuff that we had done in the summer, but there was nothing new coming up. And you talk to the broadcasters and they don't know when travel is going to be free and clear. So they couldn't commission anything. And normally you would commission something 6 or 8 months before you need to film it. And then you would, you'd plan it and put a schedule together and get it approved. And then you go out, but no one could see 6 or 8 months out. So no one was commissioning anything. And then corporate partners weren't commissioning anything. And then tourism bureaus, which I also relied on sometimes at different stages to make TV shows and stuff, they were devastated because they had their borders closed. So there were no tourists. So there was no tourism dollars funding the tourism bureau. So like all my main paths to fundraising were kind of gone as well.
So was your assumption at that point that would return and you would go back?
Yeah.
This was over.
Yeah, I totally thought it would just kind of go back to normal. So, in 2021 and 2022, I just kept trying to bang the drum. Like I just kept trying to send emails, have calls, and everyone just said the same thing. Like we don't have any money allocated for this right now. We don't know what the future holds. Get back to us next year. And I was like, how can everyone just be saying like, get back to you like, meanwhile, I had just done this 6 or 7 or 8 year streak of nonstop filming. Money was not an issue. I was able to fundraise and get everything I needed to do everything all the time. And then everything dried up. And And the stuff that they were filming was COVID friendly. So they would film in studios where everyone could be tested every day. But this whole like outdoor adventure, different country every week, Thursday night, 9 o'clock, gone.
Crazy because people probably needed it more than ever to see the world,
The one silver lining is that my back catalog was on fire during COVID. So everyone was buying, all the broadcasters out there were buying every travel and outdoor show that they could get their hands on because everyone was just living vicariously through their television. But no one was willing to put up money to keep producing them because it was too much of a risk.
So in terms of the pivot at that point,
Well, I'm still in
you're
it.
in the pivot. Right. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I spent from 2020 to 2024 thinking that the TV world would come back. And from where I was sitting in Dubai, which was a fine place to get all the work that I had gotten previously, somehow that wasn't like enough anymore. So then I came here to LA to see if I could regenerate this TV space. And I started the podcast here as well. So that was something to keep me busy and something to meet amazing and inspiring people and something to get out of my own head about not working anymore. And it's been great and I love it. But it's very interesting because the TV, the adventure travel genre here is dead too. And my shows never did really well in the United States because a lot of the stuff that's shown in the United States is owned by the big broadcasting companies. And I always made my stuff independently. And now there's a lot of platforms where you can get independent shows on TV, but like 5-6 years ago, no. So my shows were never super popular here. They were really popular in Asia and in Europe, but when I came here, like in 2024, the mood was so bad. Like we had a writer's strike and then we had an actor's strike. And it's like people were just trying to come out of COVID and then they get hit by these two strikes. And then also too, like I had multiple television executives tell me this genre is dead. This genre has moved entirely to YouTube. And one broadcast executive basically spelled it out for me. He's like, look, in 2016 and 17, I would get a $10 million budget from my, boss, and I would allocate like $1 million for each show, and we'd have 10 shows, and it would be various episodes with different directors and showrunners. And then, at the end of the year, the 10 shows would come back and we'd line them up for the following year, and then we would do it the same. And I was very lucky. I was one of the people who could get one of those 10 jobs. And I built a career off that. But now, because of the way COVID has changed the industry and changed the way people view things, now they'll put that entire $10 million into one project. And now that money is not being spread around. So you have a whole bunch of producers and showrunners that can't get anything off the ground. And I think I've also fallen victim to that. And also, corporate partners haven't really gone back to sponsoring individuals the way they did before. Like I had a deal with BMW for a long time and that was very good. And they sponsored some of my shows. Yeah, it's very strange how all the dominoes kind of lined up and fell at the exact same time.
It's interesting when you were talking about what happened in 08 and like you started getting the idea, I'll just go to TV. What's the idea that you're turning now?
Now it's hard. I mean, now I'm in a really different space. In 2008, I was 29, turning 30. I still felt young. I still felt like there was a world out there to explore. I still felt like I had a lot to say, that I had a lot of stories that I wanted to tell. And now it's, 20 years later, and I don't know, like, am I physically fit enough to still do 10 episodes and climb 10 mountains a year and make TV about it? Is that a life I still want?
Yeah. I mean, that's a question, right? What is the dream? Is it that dream or is it something
Well, I always
new?
Well, I always felt so when I was young, my hero was Anthony Bourdain, rest in peace. And I always just wanted to have a career like him. Like he came out of nowhere, started in the most humble way. Like his first television show was terrible. And then he managed to build himself up. And like, he was a terrible television presenter in those early shows. If you watch a Chef's Life or a Chef's Life was his first show. And then he did No Reservations, and then he did Parts Unknown. But that first season of A Chef's Life is as bad as you can imagine a television presenter being. He was afraid of the camera. He was terrible talking to people. and by the end of his career, he was the greatest television host in the world and the most charismatic and the best communicator and going to places that other people wouldn't. And I always felt like I wanted to do that well into my 60s. But the whole landscape's changed. And like I've had people just tell me like we don't make shows like that anymore. No one's making this kind of travel show anymore. Everyone's turning these shows into like an event, like where, it's like one thing, it's like 8 episodes and we're putting like a whole year's budget into one thing and it's going to run like 4 weeks in this month and it's like we're going to have like A-list celebrities and it's like, but what about all the other stories? And no one's interested in them and they're all going to YouTube. Okay, so then great, you go to YouTube and I have a modest following on YouTube. I put the podcast on YouTube and stuff like that. And that's like, okay, now I want to start my career again on YouTube. Okay, so how do I make money? Okay, I can get paid for views. Okay, great. That's not much. Okay, sponsors. I don't have enough, subscribers or viewership to get sponsors. Okay, so you go out and try to do a few things to get some flow or some interest and things like that. And then, but the sponsorship money that they're offering is not much. The space is crowded by younger people who are doing wonderful work, by the way. I'm not jaded at all about the kind of adventure stuff that's being shown on YouTube. There's some people working at a really high level. But the whole thing's changed. So I'm thinking now, like, I don't know if that's the world I want to go back into. And if I do go back into it, will I hate it because I had it too good for too long? Like maybe I should just like, pivot again
Yeah.
and just end that chapter of my life and end it on a high because it was magical and we had a good run and we did stuff that I think a lot of people didn't think we could do. And I think we told stories in parts of the world that most people didn't think you could tell stories about.
Well, and I think a lot of people in the industry are facing very similar questions right now.
Yeah.
And
There will be a backlash against this kind of garbage that's being kind of put out into the world and, to be consumed by the audiences. And it'll be interesting to see like who breaks through, but I don't necessarily think it'll be me. Like, if it takes 5 or 6 or 10 more years for the taste to change and for us to get away from short-term content and get back into wanting to explore the lesser known places in the world, and for a major broadcaster, that's not being in the middle of a major merger right now. Like, Discovery Channel is owned by Warner Brothers. I worked for them in 2019. BBC's been a total mess for years during COVID. So it's like, maybe going back into it without the right amount of money and without the right team around me would just be miserable. Like I would want to get the band back together. Like I would want to work with my old camera operators. I would want to work, but some of them have gotten married. Some of them have had kids over the last 6 years. Like they've all kind of given up on that part of their life and moved on. And I don't know if I'd want to like start again with an entirely fresh team, assuming I could even raise the money.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to be at those points in your life where it's like you're not sure. And how do you create a space for a new dream?
Yeah.
Yeah,
but it's great because I get to be on a podcast and talk about it with people like yourself and get it out, right? Because I think the worst thing is like when you keep it in. But I love podcasting, and it's revenue generating, and you can put it on different platforms and do advertising and stuff like that. So it's really nice, and I get a lot from it. And I still work out and keep myself fit. And I'm going to make a transition at some stage soon to live in a more mountainous, rural environment versus in the city. So I can get back to some of my roots about where most things make me happy.
Yeah, I was wondering about how LA, because you had just moved here fairly recently when we spoke the first time, and it was a big adjustment.
It was,
yeah. How that was going.
Well, it's the United States is just chaos. Like it really is chaos. Like, the politics, the news cycle, the economics, the corruption, the politicians I'm not a big fan of politicians in general, but I think the U.S. version of politicians across the border are pretty dismal, and the way they just kind of like ruin beautiful places like California is heartbreaking. So, I probably won't stay here much longer. I think, there's other places to go and explore, and I think I'll just keep moving around, but I want to keep the podcast going. But I don't know if I'll ever make TV in the same way again. Like I might just go out on 10-day treks by myself and take my camera and just put something on YouTube, and that'll be kind of, the way that I still share my travels with people, and I still have a good following there and on social media and stuff like that. But I just feel like these days of doing these big 10 episode things are kind of done. And if if a broadcast partner does come back to me and says, "Hey, you want to do something?" I'll be like, "Yeah, like, but you're going to pay for it? Like, is it going to be proper budgets? Can I bring my team back together? Can we do what we did so well for so long again?" And if they have, and if they have different ideas about how things need to go, or they want to work on really raise their budgets, or or they want us to shoot vertical because it looks better on TikTok instead of like cinematic, like 16, but no, forget it. Like, it's not, it's not it. Like, I don't, I wouldn't want to call myself a television professional if that's the output.
You had mentioned when we spoke last time that you were looking into documentary, maybe short form, long form documentary. Has that been something you've continued exploring?
I have, and I might get interested in that again. Like, I loved documentary photography back in the day, and I would always just travel around China with my camera and take photos and add them, to my portfolio, and I love doing that. And maybe there's a place in the world, where I would find a story that I'm so motivated about, where I could go out and shoot it by myself and edit it by myself and make a documentary and put it out into the world. But I don't know. I don't think my mind is restful enough to focus in on what that topic might be that I could be so passionate about,
Yeah.
because I'm still just kind of juggling around and struggling with this idea of still not making television. Like, it's still a hugely bizarre feeling. I have this closet just over here. Like, you'll see it when you go to the bathroom, and it has like all my jackets and sleeping bags and tents and yeah, and
That's horrifying.
yeah, but it's like I still feel like, oh, like I got to grab my stuff, throw it in a bag, and I have to go somewhere on Saturday because I just lived so much like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I really do get into a different version or a different style of storytelling, I guess I need to like wipe the slate really clean, and I don't know if I've done that yet.
Yeah, for sure. It does. It's a process, I think, of letting something go, if that is the direction you go, and figuring out who you are without it and who are you going to become in this new idea of something that isn't clear. And it's tricky, and I think it's something that people are um, familiar with.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm okay with what I'm really proud of what I've put out into the world, like with all the shows we made over the years. And I really feel like the quality was high, the goal of what we were doing was pure. We did it with the right frame of mind, we did it with the right purpose, and with a respectful mentality, like, and we had the chance to do everything. I mean, we've been everywhere. So maybe that's just my time to focus on something else.
Something new
Yeah.
that will be as exciting, if not more, but also reveal different parts of you, right? Because we find ourselves in what we do.
Yeah, like, in the same way that my basketball career when I was a child was stifling my desire to tell stories and write and take pictures, maybe my desire to write and take pictures and make TV was suppressing something else inside me that is yet to identify itself.
Well, I think absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's over, it must be. But, or if you can't do it in the way that you want to do it, more importantly. Because
Yeah.
I'm sure there are ways you could make compromises and do it, but having had the freedom to do it your way
Yeah.
and in a way that you're proud of must make it difficult to even think about.
Yeah, the way of going back into it would have to be the right way, and I just feel like no one right now is thinking in those terms, and no one has really any desire to do it. Like, you know, you can easily make a documentary about Alex Honnold climbing Taipei 101. You don't have to make it live. Like this whole idea of a live event on Netflix. Um, or again, like, Alex Honnold did this incredible TV show in Greenland maybe 3 years ago. And I'm just using him as an example because he's basically the only person who's doing anything adventurous on television anymore. Like, everyone else is not doing it. Like, Jason Momoa, or he's doing some motorcycle stuff where he shows up for some climbing show to judge people at the end, but he's in it for 5 seconds. Everything's kind of turning into this like reality Mr. Beast competition focused, world. And that doesn't interest me at all. And so, it's like I really think, the genre might have died with Bourdain. This is this kind of, it might not have even been COVID. Like when Bourdain died, people stopped traveling the world, and I think people stopped watching travel television. Like I really feel like when he passed on, I think like television executives were just like, well, maybe that's just the end of the genre. I mean, Stanley Tucci does his little thing in Italy, and he's a really amazing actor, and he's a nice enough TV host, and he loves cooking, and he seems like a really authentic guy, but he's not Bourdain. He's not this troubled road warrior who's, been through the meat grinder as a human being and bears it all to his audience and to the person he's breaking bread with, right? And I think that's the kind of honesty that like I always wanted to try to bring to the TV shows we were making. And I don't see anything like that anymore. It's all just super polished, super clean, and no one's just going out there and learning about a place anymore. They're all just pontificating about it, or they're doing some kind of adventure competition in it.
Right. But I think there's like you were saying earlier, there's that fact creates an appetite for something real. And I think, if anything, we don't really know what we're heading into with AI and all of this stuff. I'm just thinking the appetite for a real world, gritty world is going to get bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in 10 years, someone will come back and be like, oh, we need some guy who did this in 20, before COVID to really, bring it home. Like, let's get a list of television hosts and producers that were working before COVID, and I'll be on the list somewhere, and then it's up to someone else to filter it through and see if they give me a call.
I was thinking more like documentary.
Yeah.
Because then you have the control. You can do it your way. You can pick your story. You can do the storytelling with writings, with the photography.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah. Just going through the film festival circuit seems a bit rough. Like, it'd be nice, be interesting to do a documentary and maybe try to sell it to like a streaming partner or something like that and see. But again, it's just, I don't know. I haven't really come to terms with not being in the adventure space anymore. And I think I need to like wash that out before I can really start something fresh. And I think that's one of the things the podcast has helped me do. Like, it's helped me kind of pull focus away from that and meet a lot of interesting and inspiring people and just chat about life. But I think it hasn't fully like washed itself out. Like, I still go out to Joshua Tree like every now and then and just walk for a week across the desert, or I still, look at maps of different places and be like, oh, that'd be a great episode, like we should get out there sometime.
Where's the place on the planet that you haven't been that you want to go?
Oh my God, endless places. I haven't filmed in Colombia, and I would really love to go there. Colombia has actually the most biodiversity of any country in the world. So you can go from like below sea level in Colombia all the way to like high altitude glaciers. And now there's a trek that I wanted to do where you start at like sea level and you finish on a glacier and you take in all the different flora and fauna all the way up. And I think that's like such a great backdrop to a story that you can go on a 10-day trek climb in one country and go through and see all that different landscape and flora and fauna. Namibia, Skeleton Coast, Mount Kenya, I want to climb. Karsten's Peak in Indonesia, I haven't climbed yet. There's still stuff I wanted to go back to do in Tibet if I ever had the chance. I haven't filmed in Bhutan. There's a trip in Bhutan called the Snowman Trek. It's supposed to be like the toughest trek in the world. It's about 30 days. It takes you over 17,000 meter passes. It's supposed to be really brutal, but again, that'd be a great double episode, bring the guys out, figure out how to charge the batteries along the way, travel with a yak caravan, a bunch of Tibetan guys, and just go for it for a month. That would just be amazing. And I even know how to do the logistics for it. Like, but no one's paying the bills. I've talked to Bhutan Tourism and they don't have the budget for something like that, or they just seem uninterested. And then of course I don't have the backing of BBC or Discovery anymore where I can say, hey, this will be on this network, because they've kind of totally gone in a different direction. They've gone to more kind of reality focused, competition focused outdoor adventures. And that's never really been a huge interest. But Namibia, Karsten's Pyramid in Indonesia, I really want to do. I haven't filmed in Australia before. I really wanted to do Tough Rides Australia. I really wanted to do Tough Rides Argentina. I think like the motorcycle shows would be still a lot of fun because they're a little bit less impact than hiking and climbing for 6 or 10 months a year. But yeah, we'll see. But then it's like, well, maybe I should just like cut loose and start something fresh.
Yeah. Well,
Because when I moved to television, when I moved from photography to television, I never went back to photography.
I was just going to ask you if you still take photographs.
No, I mean, I still have cameras, but now I use them to film video. But it's no, I never went back to doing photography because I just didn't. Because the pictures nowadays that you put out, like no one sees them. Like, part of being a photographer to me. So you'll listen to all these great photographers who are long dead, and you'll see videos and writing about them, and they'll say things like, it didn't matter if anyone saw my pictures as long as I took them and I was happy with them and stuff like that. For me, it was totally different. I loved the fact that I was in the news cycle telling really important stories about what was going on in China, and I was drawn to that responsibility, and that made me want to be a photographer, and it made me want to be a better photographer. Just taking pictures and collecting them by myself doesn't, I mean, sure, I'll still put a lot of effort in and try to tell a really good story, but if no one has the opportunity to see them, um, or or want to comment about them or have some dialogue about them, then to me it really feels like not a real good use of time, because the whole point was to tell stories that people would see and understand.
Yeah, with news photography, you get such another dimension to stories. So
It's true.
it's really powerful.
And photography books don't sell. I did a couple of those.
I wonder if you could, I have two more questions. Well, actually, I have two questions and then I want to ask you about Greenland, Tanzania. So the two questions are, first, what do people assume about you that isn't true?
What do people assume about me that isn't true? I think a lot of people think I'm a daredevil. That comes across a lot. So, people see these shows like Extreme Treks, or we're climbing mountains and walking across deserts, and they see me as like a Red Bull athlete, and I'm not. Like, the Red Bull guys and girls are crazy. Like, they're riding bicycles and they're skiing down Everest, and they're like jumping out of airplanes. And I mean, I've skydived before, but I'm not a daredevil. Like, I wanted to be the Anthony Bourdain of adventure travel. I like seeing a place. I like talking to people. I like understanding the history, the environment, the culture, and going on these really tough journeys through these really beautiful places. I think, my TV shows were an exercise in discomfort, not really an exercise in being a daredevil. So I think that's a big misconception, because I think people see like, oh, you should work with Red Bull, and but the Red Bull doesn't want, a 45-minute walking across a desert, hanging out in these beautiful landscapes with these amazing camel drivers, and filming the camel driver's wife at night cooking and singing, and having these beautiful cinematic scenes. Like, they want action, and we had some of that at times, but it wasn't what we wanted. So the daredevil thing, I think, is
That's good. The second question is, if you could kind of boil down your goal with your work overall, from your journalism to your adventure travel, what would you say your goal was?
I think my biggest goal was not make people dumber. Like, I really wanted to do journalism work that was important and that educated people about what was going on, and I tried to tell the story to the best of my abilities all the time, and get multiple points of view, and try to go to interesting places that I think people should know about. And I wanted to really kind of like educate people, and show them that you can have an amazing time. If it was the travel stuff specifically, like, that you could have an amazing time in this country that that you couldn't point out on a map. Like, I have the big map in the bathroom, and it's for people to just kind of just remember how big and beautiful the world is. So I think, like, the goal always was to like educate, and to show people that the world is big and beautiful, and you can have any experience you want in it, and not to try to lie to people, or to compromise people's experiences, or to exaggerate or create any fake or false sensations or experience within the show. So it was always this idea of kind of truth and honesty.
Good segue to Greenland.
Yeah.
Uh,
In the news a lot recently.
I know. So I'm curious about your trip there. What surprised you? Had you been there before?
So I was very, very humbled and honored when a friend of mine who has his own boat, and this is already a wonderful opportunity when you have a friend that has a boat. And that person goes on a trip to Greenland. And for those people who don't know, Greenland has about 55,000 people, and it has about 50 kilometers or about 30 miles of paved road. So if you want to get anywhere around Greenland, you either have to go in the wintertime where you can do the dog sleds or the snowmobiles on the ice, or you need to go in the summertime and travel by boat, because then by boat you can go to all the villages and you kind of go up the coast, and it's mostly on the west coast that faces Canada. That's where most of the settlements are and stuff like that. So my friend had a boat and he said, I'm going to Greenland for like a month. Do you want to come with me? And I said, absolutely. This is a dream come true. Thank you so much for inviting me. And we just went to Greenland, and we started off in Nuuk, which is the capital, and there were direct flights from New York to Nuuk, which I had no idea. They were new last year in 2025, and they'll probably be back next year now. But it was a spectacular country. The landscape was incredible. The ice sheet was remarkable. The glaciers, the way of life, the people, the pride that the people had. It was, and the storytelling opportunities, was great. And my friend is from Switzerland, and he loves the outdoors, and he loves hiking and being out in the mountains. So a lot of days we would just go up these little fjords and park the boat and then go on shore, and we would just go hiking for 5 or 6 hours, the two of us, and like no trails, no nothing, just like we were the first people who've ever been there. And we did that a lot, and it was just we felt like real explorers, and we also felt like, oh my God, we're really out in the middle of nowhere out here, like there's
Just the two of you.
yeah. And it was so wonderful and so beautiful. Now if you want to talk about the political side of it, which everyone's super interested in, which no one's talking about, the Greenland people are not so happy with Denmark, because Denmark really handcuffs the economy in Greenland. So like Greenland doesn't have a free and fair economy. If you, for example, wanted to go and buy a vacation home in Greenland, you couldn't. You would have to create some company with someone in Denmark or someone in Greenland and do some kind of like 51-49 share split so that you could buy a home. You couldn't start your own tourism business in Greenland. You couldn't do anything unless you go kind of through Denmark in order to access Greenland. So I see the Danish as being kind of like rent sitters when it comes to Greenland. Like they didn't really want to do anything with it until someone else wants it. And the locals were really frustrated because they wanted to grow their economy. They know they have all this beautiful nature and all this tourism possibility around them. They know the cities can develop. They know there can be way more tourists there than they want. And they want it because that's the only way they're going to grow. It's really probably going to be, apart from mining, that's probably going to be their biggest income opportunity moving forward. So the Greenland people, I think that I talked to over the month-long period I was there, were super frustrated with Denmark, and they were open to something more free and fair. And then Trump comes along and says, "Hey, we want Greenland." So, was Trump over the top and boisterous and arrogant in the way he went about it? Sure. Did he really hit on something that is actually maybe true? Yeah. Again, it's interesting. Like there is some truth in all these little ways that the world works in, and it'll be interesting to see if Greenland can really open up and be more of a dynamic place and have more freedom to build their businesses and their economy the way they want, or whether they're just going to have to keep answering to Denmark and have this kind of constrained economic growth, which isn't helping them at all. But that was interesting, getting a chance to like sit down and talk with everyone there about this.
Well, and hopefully there's a third way where they can do it themselves without invasions. But Tanzania,
Yeah. What about Tanzania?
you're planning a trip for 2026? Is that?
Yeah, so sometimes I do like these co-collaborations with other tourism companies where we will host a journey together and we'll go out together, and people will sign up for this one adventure that we kind of plan, and I'll go there and kind of be the host and the guide for the journey. And this is the first time I've tried to do something like this, so we'll see how it goes. Like I still love riding motorcycles, and Tanzania is amazing. I climbed Kilimanjaro a long time ago, and Africa is such a wonderful continent to visit. So many diverse and interesting countries, and I would love to try to do a few more of these like collaborative things. Like maybe this is how I get back out into the world a little bit without having to worry about making television. So yeah, I think we're supposed to go in June of 2026, and we've got a few people signed up already, and we need a few more. So we'll see if that comes together. But it's something that I'd like to do, a few times a year because I get to meet other people who are like-minded and we have the same hobbies and love to get out and explore. So, hopefully it's a way that I can keep seeing the world as we move forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just thinking about um, the podcast and the fact that you have been such a nomad and yet you really enjoy just sitting and talking to people. It's kind of an interesting sort of tension
Yeah.
that you want to be out there having these sublime experiences out with nature and yet you want to be connecting as well.
I think that connecting is the thing that's coming out of the lack of my ability to go and make television again. Like, I think that's the thing that's starting to shine. And I think the podcast has really helped with that. Like your podcast guest, like 171. Like I've been doing this a lot and I've been getting great responses and the guests have been very humble, I'm very thankful for their time. You come here, you do 2 hours or more, you talk about life and this connection and this just shooting the shit and learning about who people are and what drives them. I absolutely love it. And I wish that I had maybe started this earlier, but again, I was traveling so much. So I really see no matter what I do moving forward, and there's lots of opportunities that I'm now kind of fielding in various disciplines, but none of them are in television. But there might be a way where I can go and, be involved in a different business. And then also keep the podcasting on the side because this just makes me happy. And
Yeah.
I love just being able to chat with people.
Well, it's cool. It's part of what is needed in the world is more of the connection, less, especially now when everything's going on. And
Yeah. And also too, like we live in this soundbite world. And I feel like if you really want to understand who someone is, and they sit down with you for 2 hours, there's no hiding. Like you can hide for 5 minutes, you can hide for 10 minutes, they'll edit around different stuff. But if you sit down with someone for 2 or 3 hours and you just talk, from the heart, there's no way that anyone can hide who they really are. And, we don't edit the podcast at all. I mix the audio a little bit, but that's it. And it's really nice to like have the chance to sit down and have chats with people where they're just kind of out there for the world to see, whether it's a journalist like yourself or actor or, a musician or whatever, it's just a chance to sit down and let the world kind of see who you really are. And I like that because we're in this world of short-termism. We're in this world of sound bites. We're in this world of important things being edited out on a regular basis. So I feel like, in some ways, this kind of platform is the only way to really understand what's going on in the world.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
There we go. There we go. Is there anything else you wanted to ask?
We covered it.
Yeah.
We covered it. Yeah.
We went way deeper than we went way deeper than the produced by story.
I know. Wow. Yeah. It's cool though.
Yeah, it's wild out there, and I've loved being in LA because I have this, global perspective on the world and I've seen the way things work in a lot of other countries. So coming here has been nice because I get the chance to speak with a lot of people who maybe haven't traveled as much as I have. So that perspective is pretty interesting and I've really enjoyed it. And I think a lot of people enjoy coming on the podcast and asking me about, places I filmed or places I visited. So it's kind of nice to have had all that in my rear view mirror and then have the chance to kind of bring it back and put it into the podcast on a daily basis.
Totally. Well, and there, you never know where all that is going to go, and what's the next recipe that comes through for the storytelling, the traveling.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe my future is just maybe finding a bit of remote work that I can do and living in a mountainous place where I can go hiking every day by myself and doing a podcast every day. That'd be pretty nice. That'd be like semi-retirement, maybe a little less travel, a little less airplane life, but still hiking every day, being out in the mountains, and then still having the chance to connect with an interesting person.
Parking would be easier, but
LA
I don't know
parking
about the travel time.
Yeah. Could be tough, but there's a few things I'm working on. Whatever I'm doing today is not what I'll be doing in a year from now. I
Is
can
any of that stuff you want to talk about right now real quick?
It still hasn't come to fruition, but let's just say like I've started 2026 with the realization that I can't just keep sitting around and waiting for TV people to say yes to something they don't want to do anymore. So I've kind of started this year with a bit more bravado and a bit more excitement about what the rest of my life kind of holds. Because I've, apart from really doing the podcast, I haven't really worked properly for a few years. And I liked working. I like waking up every day with a purpose, and feels good to make money and to have, to have something to do. And I think COVID and then all the chaos that's happened since then took that away from me in a lot of ways. And I'm ready to kind of install that back, but under kind of my own terms in my own way, but while also keeping this up. So, but probably not in Los Angeles. So there's a few things that are being juggled at the moment, but nothing set in stone, nothing to be able to announce at this stage.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I made it on before you
Run away.
you left and we got the conversation.
Yeah. Keri, thank you so much for coming by. I really appreciate it. I've never done a podcast like this where you asked all the questions, and it was lovely. And again, we had a great rapport in our interview that we did before on Zoom and stuff. And I'm really thankful that you came and got to meet me face to face.
Yeah, it was awesome. I enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you're up to next.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Catch us soon. Bye-bye. Fade to black. And